when I talk with pastors, bishops, different groups of Protestant and Catholic leaders, I want to be very clear. Faith in Jesus is in decline because marriage is in decline.
So JP Gance is the founder and president of Communio and the co-author of the book Endgame, the church's strategic move to save faith and family in America. JP is also the author of the nationwide study on faith and relationships. Communio is a ministry originally incubated as the Culture of Freedom Initiative at the Philanthropy Roundtable, where he served as the organization's executive vice president. The initiative raised and spent $20 million over 3 years in 3 different states, seeking to identify the most effective strategies to boost marital health, family stability, and church engagement. From 2016 to 2018, the experimental initiative worked with an ecumenical network of churches and drove down the divorce rate by 24% in Jacksonville, Florida. Today, Communio serves churches across the United States, helping them evangelize by applying learnings from their successful intervention in Jacksonville. A husband and father, JP lives in Virginia with his wife and 8 children. Let's take it away, JP.
Hey, thank you so much, Kevin. And, this is a great opportunity to speak in a disembodied way to all of you. And the giant risk for all of you is that I can't read the room, and so I don't know if I'm putting you to sleep. So we will proceed with that in mind. Now, just by way of intro, Kevin talked a bit about this. Communio, we exist to equip the local church to share the gospel through marriage and relationship ministry. That's our purpose. We work with Trinitarian churches who hold to a biblical definition of marriage. We operate in 19 states. Last year reached almost 7 million in revenue and have staff around the country. So with that said, I want to be super clear here at the very beginning. Okay, Kevin said the purpose here is to both help us to better understand the issue so that we can take action. So when I talk with pastors, bishops, different groups of Protestant and Catholic leaders, I want to be very clear. Faith in Jesus is in decline because marriage is in decline. All right. So pastorally speaking, nothing else matters unless the church reverses this trend. Okay. So I'm going to start by giving you some data that tries to prove this to you. I think this is an audience that's probably fairly sympathetic to that, but hopefully you go back to your constituencies and can share some of this. Right. So the nationwide study on faith and relationships, which Communio published last year, has this key finding. Right. It's that the collapse of resident fatherhood, which is the bad fruit of our nation's flight from marriage, that's what is fueling the growth in religious non-affiliation. It's also what's fueling the epidemic of loneliness. All right. And if you think about it, today, if you're under the age of 35, half or less than half of all young adults in that age group had continuously married parents through childhood. Right. And if family structure had no impact on faith practice, you would expect when you look out in the pews of any given church that those sitting in the pews would reflect that same family structure. And the reality is we do not see that, right? Communio's study is based on when we work with the church, we deploy a survey early on, and we've completed about 70,000 of these in-pew surveys on Sunday mornings. The study is based on a snapshot of 19,000 over a prior 6-month period across 113 different churches in 12 different states, evangelical, Protestant, Catholic churches. What we found is 80% of everybody sitting in the pews on Sunday grew up in a home with continuously married parents. And that trend held regardless of age, okay? And so if you look on this slide, obviously what I really want you to do is look at all of the very small numbers and text. Just kidding. I just want you to look at the general homogeneity between these bar graphs. The blue, men, red, women, okay? The darker blue is men who are never married. And then the lighter color in each is those who are married currently in that demographic. It goes from 18 to 29 from your left to 50 to 59 on your right. Okay. And the percentages are the percentage of people in each group who grew up in a home with continuously married parents. Okay. And what you're seeing is that if you were born in say the year 2000, or you're a single man, or you were born in the year 1964 and you are a married man, okay, you are just as likely to have grown up with a continuously married parent. In fact, 81% of your peers in that group grew up in that way. And what's changed since 1964, as everyone in this room knows, is family structure changed. Okay, and that family structure change ultimately preceded the change in our country's faith practice. In fact, churchgoers are far more likely to have resident fathers as a consequence of this. And if this is true, you'd expect to see this validated in other data. Indeed, you do. Okay, the slide that I'll share with you here, the dark blue are those non-marital births by year. Okay, the teal is ever divorced women by year, and both those are obviously proxies for family breakdown or reduction in people growing up in intact families. And so then you don't start to see religious non-affiliation grow and really mirror that growth on a slope until about 25 years after the growth in those family disintegration trends. Okay, and so it's my case that as the fruit of the sexual revolution grows, the adults grown in homes where mom and dad don't stay continuously married, they start to show up in religious non-affiliation data. It's why overwhelmingly churchgoers are more likely to have married parents. Married fathers fundamentally are the missing ingredient, okay? And there's a couple different studies that I'll bring to you here briefly to double click on it. Oxford University Press published a longitudinal study covering about 350 families, trying to understand when religious transmission successfully occurs from parent to child. One thing that I'll pull out from this book-length study is that it looks at the quality of parental relationships. And what they found was, not knowing whether or not, regardless of the frequency of familial practice of faith, what they found was an adult reporting to have a warm or close relationship with dad was 25 percentage points more likely to have the same faith as his parents. Okay, and a child who reported a warm or close relationship with mom, there was no statistical relationship in increased likelihood of faith practice. So dad is a huge factor. And so as marriage goes down, marriage is a proxy for fatherhood. And Dr. Paul Vitz, who's become a friend, he's a former atheist, a professor emeritus at NYU, one of the co-founders of Divine Mercy University, has a peer-reviewed thesis that goes into the psychological why that this happens. Okay, he's written a popularly adapted book on those studies called Faith of the Fatherless, and he does it in a psychoanalysis of the world's 30 best-known atheists. Okay, and what he found is that they all have this big thing in common, whether it's Karl Marx or Madeleine Marie O'Hare. Okay, they have this absent father or a deep resentment to their father. In the case of Madeleine, she fantasized about actually murdering her father, and had written it as much. Okay, so a failure to attach to a dad is a big deal, and you see this. Paul brought this up to me. He figured this out after the book was written. Sam Harris, one of the best known new atheists, right? Very logical. His entire reason for being an atheist is logical. Well, it appears that this same factor is going on there. He writes about the abandonment of his father, sadly at the age of 2, and his father disappearing in his life. So what this means is it's really hard to grasp that there is a heavenly Father who loves us, and so loves us that he gave his only son to die for us. It's hard to believe that if I resent, hate, or even lack an earthly father. That's the thing. Now, this isn't determinative. I always like to make this point. It's not determinative, right? 1 out of 5 people in the pews on Sunday came from a family that it was not intact, okay? But what we talk about is this is a highly important social factor. If you're trying to understand the societal-wide reduction in faith practice, there's no better explanation than the societal-wide drop in marriage and drop in fatherhood. Okay, so renewal of faith fundamentally requires Christian marriage. And but if we do it, if we succeed there, it's going to unleash a whole lot of other great things, right? It'll, for instance, solve the loneliness epidemic. Okay, and the Surgeon General came out with his advisory, 82-page advisory, and I think he just buried the lead. You know, page 15, he uses the word marriage for the first time, and he only uses the word marriage twice in 82 pages, right? And the reality is if we had rates of marriage, even with all of our smartphones, okay, if we had rates of marriage like early 2000s or late 90s levels, you wouldn't have an epidemic of loneliness, okay? We look at churchgoers, okay, and compare them to what the Surgeon General said. The Surgeon General said about half of all Americans in his advisory were lonely, about 22% of all churchgoers. When you peel that back, vast difference between single and married churchgoers. So of the singles, about half of single churchgoers are considered lonely. And the loneliest group of churchgoers are not the widows and the elderly. It is the loneliest group of widows are those between the age of 30 and 39 who are divorced and never married. Okay, they are overwhelmingly more lonely than the loneliest cohort of widows, which, by the way, based on our survey, the loneliest group of widows are widows between the age of 50 and 59. Okay, and so there's for churches, sometimes you think we're doing fine in church, and churchgoers are actually better off. And I'm going through Brad Wilcox's book now. It's a fabulous book. I'm excited about what he'll share with us in a little bit. Churchgoers have healthier marriages on the behavior of getting to church and being in a church community. But there's still a lot of need and opportunity within the church. 1 in 5 Sunday churchgoers self-report struggling in their marriage, right? And women in church are 62% more likely to struggle in their marriage than their husbands, which I think doesn't surprise any of the women in the audience. Guys were a little bit, I think, slower on the uptake of realizing what's going on. And in fact, the biggest gap in marital satisfaction between men and women are married women in church in their 30s are 109% more likely to report struggling in their marriage than their husbands. Anybody who does counseling for couples is familiar with divorce, you know that 70% of divorce filings are initiated, or at least 70% of the divorces are initiated by women. Okay, so this shouldn't surprise us. But for those of us who are concerned about equity, don't worry. By the time they get into their 40s, both people are actually more likely to struggle in their marriage. So that gap goes down, creating more equity there. So we got that going for us. Now, if you're interested in getting any more of this data, I would absolutely encourage you to download the study for free. You can download communio.org/study. Got reams of this for you. I would encourage you, as a call to action, share it with pastors, share it with small groups, share it with anybody that you know who's active and interested in sharing the gospel, because this is a huge stumbling block. But Kevin asked me for this to also have a focus on action. So I want to share. This is a huge, we don't just study this issue because we want to understand it. At Communio, we equip the local church. We're principally a ministry who takes action in these areas to share the gospel through marriage and relationship ministry. Consider this: on the Catholic side, 82% of all Catholic parishes in America spend $0 on relationship and marriage ministry, and 85% of all churches total, Protestant and Catholic, spend nothing on marriage and relationship ministry. Fundamentally, life changes person to person. Life changes most effectively not through the regional church or the diocesan church, but through the local church. Okay, and where it's absent there's a huge opportunity for us. I share that number as an optimist. There's a great opportunity for the church to take action. It's a little bit like having your team blown out at halftime and realizing that you never got on the field in the first half. We're just not engaged yet in this area. As Kevin said, our work started as a test case in Jacksonville, sixth worst city in America for marriage, prior to the work in the county, and worked with more than 50 churches, Catholic, Baptist, different denominations of churches, pioneering a data-informed approach to marriage ministry in and through the local church. Over that span, 58,912 people went through 4-hour or longer relationship ministry. We saturated the area with digital marketing, targeting couples at risk for divorce and drawing them in to a relationship ministry in the parish. The net was the divorce rate dropped 24% over that 3-year span. We had some scholars take a look at it to try to understand if we had any effect on that. There's a guy here from UVA who's one of those scholars, took a look at it and concluded there's no other way demographically to explain that decline other than our intervention, which is about all that could be said from a scholarly perspective. So this was also good for churches. Okay, what we realized is when the church serves into a felt need, and did it strategically and over time, more people come, right? We do a lot of work in Montana. There's a lot of national parks out there. They say don't feed the animals. If you feed the animals will come. And in a certain sense, I tell pastors that couples are the animals. Let's feed them so they come and grow in health and holiness in and through the local church. Okay, and so this is the form of what we do. The matter looks different church to church, or the strategic framework, if you want to call it. We say the data-informed full circle relationship ministry, using data to diagnose what's happening in the local church, and applying best practices for every stage of relationship, from the most remote stage of single life and remote preparation for marriage to those in marital crisis. And it's animated through the right side of that ministry engagement ladder, 4 steps of ministry engagement in and through the local church. And when we work with a church, every church we work with, it's a 3-year partnership. Okay, so every individual church has a church strategist who works with them through this 4 steps. Analyze. We help them collect data to know what's happening in their church through surveys and modeling. And then we unpack for the lead pastor and his team, interpret that data, set 2 clear goals. One is a breadth goal, grow Sunday attendance from X to Y over 3 years. And then a depth goal, which is let's move grown adults through relationship skills ministry in the local church, and have a target number for that. And then we work with them to create a written plan to informed by the ladder to execute it. And then we support that local church over 3 years with ongoing training and support, regular meetings to make sure they're executing it and executing it well. In fact, we're supporting 2 churches locally in Houston at this time. And then review. We help the local church gather data to know what's working and what's not working, to stop things that aren't working and increase things that are working. Sometimes pastors and church leaders get a little uncomfortable with our focus on data. I like to point out that somebody counted that there were 3,000 people baptized that day in Acts 2. And so I do think that the Holy Spirit cares about numbers, and you should too. So with that said, this is what it looks like on a timeline. We want to get them here and help them grow. 3 outreach events a year, 90% fun, 10% enrichment, moving into ongoing engagement, 70-30, more fun, less fun, more enrichment, and then ultimately into the programmatic growth journey. Communio does not author any specific growth journey content. That's an 8-hour or more program. We recommend other. We realized that was not the gap that needed to be solved. The great challenge is that amazing life-changing resources are not getting to the people who most frequently need it at the scale that we need in order to save the church and the country, right? And then we work on behalf of the local church as a world-class marketing agency, as a nonprofit ministry. Okay, so everything that somebody who's running for local office or statewide office can do, we do from a marketing and outreach perspective for the local church. So when we work with the local church, we can help that church identify, for instance, couples in the community with young kids under the age of 10, women who are very likely to be pregnant. I do not recommend that you guess this in general, but in terms of marketing, you can identify folks where there's very likely to be a pregnancy, and then other risk areas, and then being able to run Facebook marketing or Instagram, YouTube, targeting folks, email marketing. We have about 40% of the country's email addresses. Mobile block walking. I used to go door to door for my wife and I, for our church. Super painful. This changes it because you're able to go just to the houses where you can make a personal invitation that is relevant to the people sitting in the house, right? And then direct mail, as well as person-to-person texting. Really, all the different features that we know about our political process, which is way less important than marriage and the family, of course. So then we take all of that that marketing know-how, and we marry it to a deep knowledge of relationship ministry. And yes, that was an intentional pun. We own our puns. And the reality is that marketing know-how exists for a purpose. The purpose is to equip the local church to save marriage and the family. We want to take a John the Baptist approach, which is we want to decrease and we want the local church to increase and focus on this highly leveraged area of sharing the gospel through the renewal of marriage and the family. So I'll pause there and thank you. Thank you for listening. Hopefully that all came through okay. I don't know if everyone's all asleep or not, Kevin, but I'll hand it back to you.